Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Perfect Gift. Glenn Coleman stood in the doorway of his bedroom, coffee mug in hand, watching his wife Melanie arrange the exotic plant she'd brought home the evening before. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows caught the plant's unusual purple-black leaves, making them shimmer with an almost metallic sheen. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Melanie said, stepping back to admire her purchase. The woman at the botanical garden said it was incredibly rare. Apparently, it only blooms once every few years, and when it does, she paused dramatically. The flowers are supposed to be absolutely stunning. Glenn nodded, though something about the plant unsettled him. Its leaves seemed too perfect, too symmetrical, and there was an odd sweet smell emanating from it that reminded him of rotting fruit masked by perfume. But Melanie looked so pleased with herself, and after the year they'd had, his promotion at the engineering firm, her successful launch of the interior design business, finally getting their twins into the private school they'd wanted, he didn't want to dampen her spirits. "What's it called?" he asked, setting his mug on the dresser and walking over to examine it more closely. "Belladonna Nocturne," Melanie replied, running her fingers gently along one of the leaves. "Isn't that romantic?" The lady said. "It means beautiful lady of the night." Glenn's engineering mind kicked in as he studied the plant structure. The root system seemed unusually robust for a decorative plant, and the soil looked different from typical potting mix, darker, more organic. "Where exactly did you get this?" "I thought you said the botanical garden, but..." "Well, not the main one downtown. There's this specialty place about an hour north. Galloway Botanical Specialties. The owner, Aurora Galloway, she has the most incredible collection of rare plants. She said this one was perfect for our bedroom because it releases oxygen at night instead of carbon dioxide like most plants." "That's unusual," Glenn mused. Most plants he knew have switched to releasing CO2 at night. Did she mention anything about care instructions? Special fertilizer, watering schedule? Melanie laughed, the sound light and musical. "You, in your engineering brain, always needing to understand how everything works." She said it's very low maintenance. Just water it once a week and keep it in indirect sunlight. Glenn's phone buzzed with a text from his business partner at Coleman Burton Engineering. Wesley Burton had been his closest friend since college, and their small but successful firm had been built on their combined expertise. Glenn's structural engineering background and Wesley's environmental engineering specialization, which included a deep knowledge of botany and plant biology. "Wes wants to meet for lunch today," Glenn said, scrolling through the message. "Says he has some concerns about the Morrison project." "That's fine. Emma and Ethan have soccer practice after school anyway, so I'll be late getting home." Melanie glanced at her watch. "Speaking of which, I need to get them ready. Can you help Emma find her cleats? I think they're in the garage." As Glenn headed toward the garage, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the plant. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo. Wesley would know if there was anything unusual about it. The morning routine proceeded as normal. Breakfast chaos with the 8-year-old twins, Emma's last-minute panic about a science project, Ethan's refusal to wear anything but his lucky jersey. Glenn dropped them off at Riverside Private Academy, the exclusive school they'd worked so hard to get the kids into. The tuition was astronomical, but the education and connections would set Emma and Ethan up for life. At the office, Glenn tried to focus on the structural calculations for the Morrison high-rise, but his mind kept drifting back to the plant. Something about Melanie's story didn't quite add up. She was usually so detail-oriented about her purchases, especially expensive ones, but she'd been vague about the cost and location. Around 11:30, his phone rang. Wesley's name flashed on the screen. "Glenn, I need to see you right now." "Where are you?" "At the office." "Wes, what?" "I'm coming up. Don't go anywhere." The line went dead. Glenn stared at his phone, confused by his partner's urgent tone. Wesley was typically the more laid-back of the two, the one who kept Glenn grounded when his engineering perfectionism threatened to derail projects. 5 minutes later, Wesley burst through the office door, his usually neat brown hair disheveled, his face pale with panic. "Where did you get this plant?" he demanded, holding up Glenn's phone with the photo displayed. Melanie bought it yesterday. Why? What's wrong? Wesley sank in a chair across from Glenn's desk, his hands shaking. Glenn, this isn't just any exotic plant. If I'm right about what this is... He paused, running a hand through his hair. We need to get your family out of that house. Now. Glenn felt a chill run down his spine. You're scaring me, Wes. What exactly are you talking about? This plant, I've only seen it in research papers, and those were classified. It's called Somnolentia mortis. The common name, when people bother to give it one, is the widow's lure. Widow's lure? That's not what Melanie said it was called, because whoever sold it to her lied. Glenn, this plant doesn't exist in any legitimate botanical garden. It's been banned from cultivation in most countries because it's incredibly dangerous. Wesley leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The plant releases a cocktail of airborne toxins, especially at night. The initial exposure causes euphoria and deep sleep, but continued exposure over several weeks leads to organ failure, starting with the liver and kidneys. Glenn's blood ran cold. Are you saying someone is trying to poison my family? I'm saying someone has placed a biological weapon in your bedroom, designed to kill you slowly and make it look like natural causes. The question is who and why. Glenn stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back and hitting the wall. I need to call Melanie, get her and the kids out of the house. Wait. Wesley grabbed his arm. If we're dealing with someone sophisticated enough to acquire this plant, we need to be smart about this. They might be watching, waiting to see if you discover what it is. If you suddenly evacuate your family, they might escalate to more direct methods. Glenn's mind raced through the possibilities. Who would want to harm his family? His engineering firm had no major enemies, no disgruntled clients who would resort to murder. Melanie's interior design business was successful, but hardly controversial. They lived quietly, paid their taxes, coached Little League on weekends. There's something else, Wesley continued. The plant's care requirements. It needs to be watered with a specific nutrient solution to maintain its toxicity. Whoever gave this to Melanie either provided that solution disguised as regular plant food, or they have a way to access your house regularly to maintain it. The implications hit Glenn like a physical blow. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Someone with access to illegal biological materials. Someone who knew their routines well enough to know that Melanie would place a bedroom plant exactly where it would do the most damage. We need to find out where she really got this plant, Glenn said, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. This Aurora Galloway, whoever she is, she's either the person trying to kill us or she's working for them. Wesley nodded grimly. I'll start researching the plant source networks, see if I can trace where something like this might have come from. But Glenn, we can't let on that we know. If they realize we're onto them, they might try something more immediate, Glenn finished. He thought of Emma and Ethan, probably sitting in their afternoon classes, unaware that someone wanted them dead. The protective fury that surged through him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Don't worry, Wes. Whoever is behind this made one critical mistake. What's that? Glenn's expression hardened, the easygoing family man replaced by something far more dangerous. They picked the wrong family to mess with. I spent 4 years in Army Corps of Engineers before college, and I didn't build a successful business by backing down from problems. They want to play games with my family's lives? I'll show them what a real engineer can do when someone threatens what matters most to him. Wesley had never seen this side of his partner before, but he recognized the cold calculation in Glenn's eyes. What do you want me to do? Keep researching the plant. I'm going to pay a visit to this Galloway Botanical Specialties. But first, I need to figure out how to neutralize the thing in my bedroom without alerting whoever put it there. Actually, Wesley said, pulling out his laptop, I might have an idea about that. If we can't remove it without raising suspicions, maybe we can sabotage it from the inside. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. That evening, Glenn watched from his home office as Melanie moved around the bedroom, completely unaware of the danger lurking 3 feet from where she slept. He'd convinced Wesley to come over for dinner, ostensibly to discuss the Morrison project, but really so his partner could get a closer look at the plant and the surrounding area. The soil composition is definitely altered, Wesley murmured as they stood in the bedroom doorway after Melanie had gone downstairs to help Emma with homework. Look at the drainage system. This isn't a normal potting setup. Someone modified this specifically for optimal toxin release. Glenn examined the base of the pot more carefully. These aren't regular drainage holes. They're positioned to create airflow patterns. Whoever set this up knows exactly what they're doing. There's something else, Wesley said, kneeling beside the plant. See these white crystals mixed in with the soil? That's not fertilizer. It's a chemical accelerant designed to enhance the plant's natural toxin production. So they're not just trying to poison us slowly, they're trying to make sure it works fast. Wesley nodded grimly. Based on the concentration, I'd say you have maybe 2 weeks before serious symptoms start showing. 3 weeks before. He didn't need to finish. Glenn felt his jaw clench. We need to know who we're dealing with. Tonight, after everyone's asleep, I'm going to install some surveillance equipment. If someone's been coming into our house to maintain this thing, I want to know when and how. What about Melanie? Are you going to tell her? Glenn had been wrestling with this question all day. Not yet. She's not good at hiding her emotions, and if whoever's behind this is watching, they'll know something's changed. Besides, I need more information before I can protect her properly. They went downstairs to join the family for dinner, Glenn forcing normalcy into his voice as he asked Emma about her science project and listened to Ethan's detailed recap of soccer practice. But his mind was elsewhere, analyzing every person who'd been in their house recently, every routine that someone could have observed, every enemy he might have made. After dinner, while Melanie supervised the kids' homework and bedtime routines, Glenn excused himself to his home office. He pulled up the property records for Galloway Botanical Specialties, running the address through every database he had access to through his engineering firm's research subscriptions. The results were disturbing. The property had been purchased 6 months ago by Aurora Galloway, but Aurora Galloway had died in a car accident in Oregon 2 years earlier. Whoever was using her identity had done their homework, but not quite well enough to fool a thorough background check. Glenn dug deeper, cross-referencing the property purchase with shell companies, looking for any connection to his own life. What he found made his blood run cold. The property purchase had been financed through a loan from Riverside Financial Group, the same company that held the mortgage on their house and had processed the loan for Emma and Ethan's private school tuition. Someone with access to their financial information had been planning this for months. Glenn's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up every interaction they'd had with Riverside Financial, every employee they'd dealt with, every piece of personal information they'd provided. The pattern that emerged was subtle but undeniable. 3 different interactions over the past year. The school loan, a refinancing inquiry Melanie had made, and a consultation about a home equity line of credit had all been handled by the same person, Mitchell Walker, Senior Financial Advisor. Glenn pulled up Walker's employee profile and felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Walker had been with Riverside Financial for 8 years, had access to detailed financial records of high-net-worth clients, and according to his LinkedIn profile, had previously worked for a company that had been involved in a major lawsuit with Coleman Burton Engineering 3 years earlier. The lawsuit had been over a construction defect in a residential development. Glenn and Wesley's firm had been hired as expert witnesses to prove that the defects were caused by shoddy construction practices, not engineering flaws. Their testimony had cost the construction company millions in damages and led to several executives facing criminal charges. Mitchell Walker had been the project finance manager for that construction company. "I've got you, you son of a bitch," Glenn muttered, printing out every document he could find linking Walker to both the failed development and Riverside Financial. His phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. "Found something. The plant's source network traces back to a lab in Mexico that was shut down last year for illegal bioweapons research. Someone with serious connections provided this." Glenn typed back, "I know who. Meet me tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Coffee shop on 5th Street. I'll explain everything." He spent the next hour setting up a hidden camera system in the bedroom, using equipment left over from a security consultation his firm had done for a corporate client. The cameras were practically invisible, designed to look like smoke detector components and electrical outlet covers. If someone was coming into their house to maintain the plant, he would know about it. That night, Glenn lay in bed listening to Melanie's peaceful breathing, the deadly plant just a few feet away releasing its invisible poison into the air. But instead of fear, he felt something else building in his chest, a cold, calculating rage that reminded him of his military training. Whoever Mitchell Walker was working with, whatever their ultimate goal, they had made a fundamental miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a soft, suburban family man who would never see the threat coming. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Around 2 a.m., the hidden cameras picked up movement. Glenn watched from his home office as a figure in dark clothing entered through the back door, a door that should have been locked. The intruder moved with practiced efficiency, knowing exactly where to go and what to do. The figure was small and slight, definitely female, wearing a ski mask and gloves. She went directly to the bedroom, spent 5 minutes doing something to the plant Glenn couldn't quite see from the camera angle, then disappeared the same way she'd come. Glenn checked the locks after she left. No signs of forced entry, which meant she had a key. In the morning, after Melanie and the kids left for their daily routines, Glenn examined the plant more closely. Fresh white crystals had been added to the soil, and the leaves looked healthier, more vibrant. Someone was definitely maintaining the plant to ensure maximum lethality. Glenn's phone rang as he was photographing the new evidence. "Glenn, get your kids and get out of that house. Leave everything." It was Wesley, and his voice was pure panic. "What's wrong?" Glenn shouted into the phone. "I just got a call from my contact at the CDC. Someone reported a suspicious plant inquiry from our area. They're sending a team to investigate." "Glenn, if they find that plant in your house, they'll quarantine your entire family and everyone you've been in contact with." But that's not the worst part. Glenn's chest tightened. "What?" The report came from Mitchell Walker at Riverside Financial. "He's playing both sides, poisoning you slowly while setting up a cover story for why your family gets sick. When the CDC finds the plant, it'll look like you acquired it illegally yourself, maybe for some kind of insurance fraud scheme." Glenn felt the world tilt around him. "How long do we have?" "Maybe an hour. 2 at most." "This ends now," Glenn said, his voice deadly calm. "Wes, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. We're going to turn this whole thing around on them." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mitchell Walker and his friends are about to learn what happens when you threaten a combat engineer's family. Get over here now and bring every piece of documentation we have on the original lawsuit. It's time to go on the offense." As Glenn hung up the phone, he looked at the deadly plant one more time. Soon, it would be evidence in a very different kind of case than Walker had planned. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Chapter 3. The trap is set. Glenn had 30 minutes before Wesley arrived and maybe an hour before the CDC team showed up, if Walker was telling the truth about the timeline. He moved through his house with military precision, collecting evidence, photographing everything, and preparing for what would either be the smartest gambit of his life or a spectacular disaster. First, he retrieved the soil samples Wesley had secretly taken the night before and sealed them in evidence bags with timestamps and location data. Then he printed out every financial document linking Walker to both Riverside Financial and the construction company that had lost the lawsuit 3 years earlier. The key to any successful trap was understanding your enemy's psychology. Walker thought he was dealing with a typical suburban target, someone who would panic when confronted with authority figures and would be too confused to mount an effective defense. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Glenn's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "CDC team ETA, 45 minutes. Suggest you prepare explanations for illegal botanical acquisition." So Walker was monitoring his communications. Glenn smiled grimly and typed back, "Thanks for the heads up. Family evacuated to hotel as precaution. Will cooperate fully with investigation." It was a lie, of course. Melanie and the kids were safely at their respective schools and activities, but Walker didn't need to know that. Let him think his plan was working perfectly. Wesley arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a briefcase full of documents and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Tell me you have a plan," he said, setting the briefcase on Glenn's kitchen table. "I do, but it's going to require perfect timing and a lot of trust. Glenn spread out a detailed floor plan of the house he'd drawn that morning. The CDC team will want to examine the plant and the bedroom. When they do, they're going to find evidence that someone has been maintaining it with illegal chemical enhancers. Right, but they'll assume it was us. Not if we give them a better explanation. Glenn pointed to marked locations on the floor plan. I've planted evidence that will lead them to the truth, but only if they know where to look. That's where you come in. Wesley examined the floor plan. What kind of evidence? The hidden cameras caught our midnight visitor last night. But more importantly, I set up motion sensors throughout the house this morning. If someone tries to enter while we're dealing with the CDC, we'll have real-time proof that the threat is external. You think Walker will try something while the CDC is here? I'm counting on it. His whole plan depends on us being too panicked and confused to mount a coherent defense. He'll want to ensure the evidence is exactly where the CDC expects to find it. Glenn's expression hardened. What he doesn't know is that I've replaced the chemical enhancers with harmless plant food and hidden the real evidence where he'll never think to look. Wesley was beginning to understand. You're going to let him walk into his own trap. Exactly, but we need to be smart about this. When the CDC team arrives, we cooperate completely. We tell them the truth, that Melanie bought the plant from Galloway Botanical Specialties, that we only discovered its true nature yesterday, and that we suspect someone has been using it as a weapon against our family. And if they don't believe us, Glenn pulled out his laptop and showed Wesley the financial trail he'd uncovered. Then we show them this. Walker's connection to the original lawsuit, the suspicious timing of our interactions with Riverside Financial, and the fact that Aurora Galloway died 2 years ago. 20 minutes later, Glenn watched through his office window as 2 black SUVs pulled into his driveway. 4 people in CDC hazmat suits emerged, along with 2 agents in dark suits who were definitely not medical personnel. Glenn's doorbell rang precisely at 11 a.m. Mr. Coleman? I'm Dr. Sarah Chun from the Centers for Disease Control. We've received a report about a potentially dangerous biological specimen in your home. Glenn opened the door wide, projecting calm cooperation. Thank you for coming so quickly. My partner and I discovered the plant's true nature yesterday, and we've been trying to figure out what to do. Dr. Chun raised an eyebrow. Your partner? Wesley Burton. He's an environmental engineer with botanical expertise. He identified the plant from a photograph. The CDC team followed Glenn into his house, Wesley trailing behind with his briefcase of documentation. Glenn watched their faces as they entered the bedroom and saw the plant. My God, Dr. Chun breathed. How long has this been in your house? 3 days, Glenn replied. My wife purchased it from a place called Galloway Botanical Specialties. We can provide you with all the details. One of the suited agents stepped forward. Mr. Coleman, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. We're going to need you to walk us through exactly how you acquired this specimen. Glenn had been expecting this. The FBI's involvement meant Walker had spun this as a potential terrorism case, not just a health hazard. Of course, Glenn said. But first, I need to show you something that I think will change your perspective on what's really happening here. He led them to his office and pulled up the financial records on his computer. 3 years ago, my engineering firm provided expert testimony in a lawsuit that cost Hartwell Construction Company millions of dollars. The project finance manager for that company was Mitchell Walker. 6 months ago, Walker began handling all of our family's financial accounts through Riverside Financial Group. 3 days ago, my wife purchased this plant from a woman using the identity of Aurora Galloway, who died in Oregon 2 years ago. Dr. Chun and Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances. Are you suggesting someone is trying to poison your family in revenge for a business dispute? Rodriguez asked. I'm suggesting you examine the plant's soil composition and compare it to what someone maintaining it would need to bring in regularly, Glenn replied. Wesley opened his briefcase and pulled out chemical analysis reports. The plant's soil contains synthetic enhancers that need to be replenished every few days to maintain toxicity. Someone with access to this house has been maintaining it. Glenn's motion sensors chimed on his phone. Someone was in the house. Agent Rodriguez. Glenn said quietly, someone just entered my house through the back door. The FBI agent immediately radioed for backup while drawing his weapon. The CDC team took cover behind Glenn's desk as armed agents moved through the house. 2 minutes later, they returned with a woman in handcuffs, the same slight figure Glenn had seen on camera the night before. Found her in the bedroom, messing with the plant, one of the agents reported. She had keys to the house and a bag full of chemical compounds. Agent Rodriguez looked at Glenn with newfound respect. "Mr. Coleman, how did you know she was coming?" "Because I've been tracking this conspiracy for the past 24 hours, Glenn replied. "And I suspected that whoever was behind it would try to ensure their evidence was perfect before you examined it." The woman in custody was identified as Carrie Hahn, a former lab technician from the Mexican facility that had produced the illegal plant. Financial records quickly revealed payments from Mitchell Walker dating back 6 months. When confronted with the evidence, Hahn broke immediately. Walker had hired her to maintain the plant and had promised her immunity from prosecution for her role in the Mexican lab's illegal activities. The plan had been to slowly poison Glenn's family while setting up a cover story that would make their deaths look like Glenn's own fault. Revenge for a business rival while destroying his reputation posthumously. Agent Rodriguez arrested Mitchell Walker at his office that afternoon. Walker's computer contained detailed plans for the scheme, including backup methods if the plant didn't work quickly enough. But Glenn's trap had one final element. "Agent Rodriguez," he said as they wrapped up the investigation, "I need to ask you to search Walker's home and office for evidence of other ongoing cases. If he was willing to do this to my family over a 3-year-old lawsuit, I suspect we're not his only targets." They found evidence of 4 other families that Walker had been targeting through various means, all clients of Riverside Financial who had somehow cost him money or professional standing in the past. 2 other families had already shown early symptoms of poisoning from plants Walker had arranged for them to receive. Walker's arrest undoubtedly saved multiple lives. That evening, as Glenn sat on his back porch watching Emma and Ethan play in their yard, the deadly plant long since removed by the CDC team, Melanie curled up beside him on their porch swing. "I still can't believe someone tried to kill us over a business dispute," she said softly. "Some people can't handle losing," Glenn replied, wrapping his arm around her. "But they picked the wrong family to mess with." Melanie smiled up at him. "My badass engineer husband, always thinking 10 steps ahead." Glenn kissed the top of her head, thinking about the trap he'd set and how perfectly it had worked. Walker had been so focused on his elaborate revenge scheme that he'd never considered the possibility that his targets might fight back with equal intelligence and considerably more skill. "Just protecting what matters most," he said simply. As the sun set behind their house, Glenn felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning and everything to do with family. Walker and his associates would spend the next several decades in federal prison. The other families Walker had targeted would receive the medical treatment they needed, and the Coleman family would sleep safely in their own beds, no longer threatened by the deadly bloom that had briefly brought such terror into their lives. Sometimes, Glenn reflected, the best revenge was simply being smarter than your enemies and making sure justice was served exactly as it should be. Chapter 4. The Deeper Web. 3 days after Walker's arrest, Glenn thought the nightmare was over. The CDC had cleared their house. Carrie Hahn had pleaded guilty to multiple charges, and Mitchell Walker was being held without bail pending trial. The other families Walker had targeted were recovering under medical supervision, and Glenn's family was trying to return to normal. That's when Wesley called with news that changed everything. "Glenn, we have a problem. A big one." Glenn was in his office, trying to catch up on the work he'd missed during the crisis. "What now?" "I've been going through the financial records the FBI shared with us, trying to understand the full scope of Walker's operation. The money trail goes a lot deeper than we thought." Glenn set down his coffee, suddenly alert. "How deep?" Walker was just middle management. The money for Carrie Hahn, the lab equipment, the property purchase for the fake botanical garden. It all traces back to a shell company called Meridian Holdings. And Meridian Holdings is owned by someone you know. "Who?" "Roland Booth." Glenn felt the room temperature drop 10 degrees. Roland Booth had been the CEO of Hartwell Construction, The man who'd lost everything when Glenn and Wesley's testimony exposed the construction defects 3 years ago. Unlike Walker, who'd simply lost his job, Booth had faced criminal charges, lost his company, and spent 18 months in federal prison. Where is Booth now? That's the thing. He was released 6 months ago, right around the time this whole operation started. Glenn's mind raced through the implications. Walker's plan hadn't been simple revenge. It had been a carefully orchestrated campaign directed by someone with far more resources and motivation. If Booth is behind this, then Walker wasn't the end of it, Glenn realized. He was just the first phase. There's more, Wesley continued. I found property records showing that Booth has been using various aliases to purchase real estate all around the city. Glenn, he's got properties within 5 miles of the kids' school, Melanie's office, and your gym. Glenn felt that familiar combat readiness flood through his system. He's been watching us, learning our routines, for months, maybe longer. And if the plant was just phase 1, then we need to figure out what phase 2 looks like before it starts. Glenn was already pulling up maps on his computer, marking the locations Wesley had mentioned. Can you get over here? I need to know everything about these properties and what Booth might be planning. An hour later, Wesley arrived with a folder full of surveillance photos he'd taken that morning. They spread everything out on Glenn's dining room table. Property records, financial documents, and photographs of 3 different buildings Booth had purchased under false names. This one concerns me the most, Wesley said, pointing to photos of a warehouse about 2 miles from Riverside Private Academy. It was purchased 4 months ago, and according to utility records, someone's been running high-powered electrical equipment there regularly. Glenn studied the photos. The warehouse was in an industrial area with limited foot traffic, perfect for someone who wanted to operate without observation. What kind of equipment are we talking about? The power consumption patterns suggest laboratory equipment. Maybe manufacturing. Manufacturing what? I don't know, but given what we know about Booth's resources and his access to illegal biological materials. Wesley didn't need to finish the sentence. Glenn's phone rang. The caller ID showed Riverside Private Academy. Mr. Coleman? This is Principal Stevens. I'm calling because we've had some unusual activity around the school today. A man claiming to be conducting a safety inspection was asking detailed questions about our emergency procedures and evacuation routes. When we asked for his credentials, he left abruptly. Glenn's blood turned to ice. Can you describe this man? Medium height, gray hair, maybe 55 years old. He seemed particularly interested in the pickup procedures for your children. Roland Booth was in his mid-50s and had gray hair. Principal Stevens, I need you to implement your highest security protocols immediately. Don't let Emma and Ethan leave the building with anyone except my wife or me. I'll be there in 20 minutes to explain everything. Glenn hung up and looked at Wesley. He's making his move. They drove to the school together, Glenn calling Melanie on the way to warn her to stay away from her office and meet them at the school instead. He didn't tell her why over the phone, just that there was a security concern and she needed to trust him. At Riverside Private Academy, Principal Stevens led them to his office and showed them security camera footage from the morning. The man asking questions was definitely Roland Booth, though he looked different than he had 3 years ago, thinner, harder, with the kind of cold focus that Glenn recognized from his military days. He knew a lot about the school's layout and routines, Principal Stevens said. More than someone conducting a random safety inspection should know. Glenn studied the footage, analyzing Booth's movements and body language. He wasn't here for an inspection. He was doing reconnaissance for something specific. Like what? Wesley asked. Glenn's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice trap with Walker. Too bad he was expendable. Phase 2 begins tonight. Your children are very beautiful when they sleep. Wesley read the message over Glenn's shoulder. Oh God. Glenn immediately called the FBI agent who had handled Walker's case. Agent Rodriguez? We have an escalation. 20 minutes later, Agent Rodriguez arrived at the school with a full security team. Glenn showed him everything they discovered about Booth's involvement and the threatening message. We'll put protection details on your family immediately, Rodriguez said. But Mr. Coleman, I have to ask, is there somewhere safe you can take them until we can locate Booth? Glenn had been thinking about this. My brother Chad lives on a ranch in Wyoming. Military background, defensible location, completely off the grid where Booth is concerned. That might be wise. But Glenn shook his head. No, running won't solve this. Booth has resources, patience, and a 3-year grudge. If we run now, he'll just wait and strike when we least expect it. What are you suggesting? Glenn looked at the security camera footage again, this time focusing on something he'd missed before. In one frame, Booth was checking his watch and looking directly at a specific camera. He hadn't been trying to avoid surveillance. He'd been making sure he was seen. He wants us to run, Glenn realized. This whole thing at the school was theater. He's trying to panic us into making mistakes. Agent Rodriguez frowned. That's a pretty sophisticated psychological operation. Roland Booth spent 18 months in federal prison thinking about what he wanted to do to the people who destroyed his life. He had time to plan, time to think, and access to other inmates with specialized skills. Glenn's mind was working through the tactical situation. He's not just after revenge anymore. He wants to completely destroy everything we've built, the same way we destroyed his company. Wesley had been quiet during this exchange, but now he looked up from the financial documents he'd been reviewing. Glenn, look at this. The timing of Booth's property purchases corresponds with specific events in your family's life. He bought the warehouse 2 days after Emma made honor roll. He purchased a house 3 blocks from your neighborhood the week after you got promoted. He's been watching you celebrate your successes and planning to take them away. The psychological profile was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. It was about a man who'd lost everything and wanted to make sure Glenn experienced the same systematic destruction. Agent Rodriguez, Glenn said, I need you to understand something. Roland Booth isn't going to stop with threats and biological weapons. He's building towards something bigger, something designed to cause maximum psychological damage while looking like tragic accidents. What do you recommend? Glenn thought about the warehouse, the surveillance, the calculated psychological pressure. We give him exactly what he thinks he wants. We make him believe his plan is working perfectly. I don't understand. Glenn smiled grimly. Roland Booth thinks he's playing chess with a suburban engineer who got lucky once. He's about to learn that some people are much more dangerous when you threaten their families than when you threaten them directly. Wesley recognized that look in his partner's eyes. Glenn, what are you planning? I'm going to give Mr. Booth the war he's been preparing for. But it's going to be fought on my terms, not his. Agent Rodriguez looked between the 2 engineers. Mr. Coleman, I can't authorize any kind of vigilante operation. You won't have to. Everything I'm going to do will be completely legal and fully documented. But by the time I'm finished, Roland Booth is going to wish he'd stayed in federal prison. Glenn pulled out his phone and started making calls. Chad, it's Glenn. I need to borrow some of your old military equipment, and I need you to come to Denver. Tonight, the war for Glenn Coleman's family was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 5, The Counterattack. That evening, Chad Coleman arrived at Glenn's house, carrying a duffel bag and wearing the same predatory smile that had made him legendary in Army Special Operations. The 2 brothers hadn't seen each other in 6 months, but Glenn knew he could count on Chad when family was threatened. So, Chad said, setting his bag on the kitchen table, some wannabe criminal mastermind thinks he can terrorize my niece and nephew. Glenn brought his brother up to speed on everything. Walker's plant scheme, Booth's involvement, and the psychological warfare that was clearly just beginning. Chad listened with the focused attention of a professional soldier, asking tactical questions and identifying vulnerabilities. This Booth character made a classic mistake, Chad said when Glenn finished. He gave you time to prepare, and it showed you his capabilities before committing to a direct assault. What do you mean? Think about it. The plant was slow-acting, designed to look natural. Walker's arrest exposed the financial trail, which led you to Booth. Then Booth shows up at the school, making barely concealed threats. He's escalating, but he's doing it predictably. Wesley, who had joined them for dinner, looked confused. Isn't that bad for us? If he's escalating, Chad shook his head. It's bad if you're a victim. It's perfect if you're a predator. Glenn understood immediately. You're saying we flip the script. Instead of reacting to his attacks, we start hunting him. Exactly. But we do it smart. Legal, documented, and absolutely ruthless within those constraints. Chad opened his duffel bag and revealed an array of surveillance equipment that made Glenn's hidden cameras look like toys. Military-grade night vision, motion sensors, long-range audio equipment, and GPS trackers. All commercially available, all legal to use on your own property or in public spaces. What's the plan? Glenn asked. We turned Booth's own surveillance system against him. He's been watching your family for months, learning your routines. Now we watch him back, learn his routines, and figure out exactly what he's planning for Phase 2. They spent the next 2 hours setting up a comprehensive surveillance network. Chad's experience in covert operations showed in every detail. Camera placements that would be invisible to anyone not trained in counter-surveillance. Motion sensors that could track movement patterns across several city blocks, and audio equipment that could pick up conversations from a quarter-mile away. The warehouse is our primary target, Chad said, studying satellite photos on Glenn's computer. If he's manufacturing something there, we need to know what it is. How do we get close enough to find out without breaking any laws? Chad smiled. We don't get close. We let technology do the work. He pulled out what looked like a small drone, but more sophisticated than any consumer model Glenn had seen. This little beauty can get us thermal imaging, audio recording, and chemical analysis from a safe distance. Completely legal as long as we stay in public airspace and don't interfere with his property rights. Meanwhile, Glenn had been working on a different angle. I've been thinking about Booth's psychology. He spent 18 months in prison because of our testimony. He's not just after revenge. He wants vindication. He wants to prove that we destroyed an innocent man's life. Wesley looked up from the financial documents he'd been analyzing. How does that help us? Because it means he can't just kill us quickly and quietly. He needs us to suffer publicly, and he needs the suffering to look like natural consequences of our own actions. Chad nodded slowly. So he's going to try to destroy your reputation first, then your family. Which means his next move will be something that makes us look guilty of something terrible, Glenn continued. Something that turns public opinion against us and makes our deaths look like justice. Glenn's phone buzzed with another message from Booth. You destroyed my life with lies. Tomorrow, everyone will see what kind of man you really are. That's not a death threat, Chad observed. That's a promise to expose something. Glenn felt a chill of recognition. He's going to frame us for something. Make it look like we're the real criminals. But frame you for what? Before Glenn could answer, Wesley's laptop chimed with an alert. Guys, we have movement at the warehouse. The surveillance feed showed Roland Booth's car pulling up to the warehouse, followed by a panel van Glenn didn't recognize. Several people emerged from the van, carrying equipment that looked disturbingly sophisticated. Can you get thermal imaging? Glenn asked. Chad operated the drone controls with practiced efficiency. Coming up now. Jesus, Glenn, look at this. The thermal image showed at least 8 people inside the warehouse, gathered around what appeared to be large-scale manufacturing equipment. The heat signatures suggested chemical processing, something that required precise temperature control. Chemical manufacturing, Chad said grimly. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about creating enough evidence to frame you for domestic terrorism. Glenn's mind raced through the possibilities. They're going to manufacture evidence that we were involved in producing illegal weapons. Maybe make it look like the plant was just a test run for something bigger. And when they discover this evidence, it destroys our credibility completely. Anything we say about being targeted looks like desperate lies from exposed terrorists. Wesley was frantically typing on his laptop. I'm cross-referencing the people in that van with known associates of Roland Booth. If we can identify them, maybe we can figure out exactly what they're planning. Chad studied the thermal imaging more carefully. Glenn, I don't think we have time for a detailed investigation. Whatever they're manufacturing in there, they're working fast. I guess we have maybe 12 hours before they deploy it. Then we need to move tonight. Move how? We can't just break into his warehouse. Glenn smiled, and Wesley recognized that dangerous expression from 3 days earlier. We don't break in. We let them come to us, and we make sure they bring all their evidence with them. I don't understand. Roland Booth wants to destroy my reputation by making me look like a terrorist. Fine. Let's give him an opportunity he can't resist. Glenn pulled out his phone and dialed Agent Rodriguez's number. Agent Rodriguez? Glenn Coleman. I need to report a suspicious chemical smell coming from my basement. I think someone might have planted something in my house. Chad and Wesley stared at him in shock. Glenn, what are you doing? Wesley whispered. Glenn held up a hand for silence as he continued the call. I'm worried it might be connected to the Roland Booth situation. Can you send a team to investigate tonight? I want everything documented in case this is part of his plan to frame my family. After Glenn hung up, Chad shook his head in admiration. You magnificent bastard. You're going to let the FBI search your house and find nothing, which creates an official record that you're actively cooperating with law enforcement and concerned about being framed. Exactly. And when Booth moves against us tomorrow, every piece of evidence he plants will look exactly like what it is, a desperate attempt to frame an innocent family. Wesley was beginning to understand the strategy. But what if he doesn't take the bait? Glenn looked at the thermal imaging of the warehouse, where the manufacturing operation was still running at full capacity. Oh, he'll take it, because Roland Booth has been planning this revenge for 18 months, and he's not going to let the perfect opportunity slip away. He's going to try to plant that manufactured evidence tonight, while he thinks we're distracted by the FBI search. Chad was already checking his surveillance equipment, and when he does, we'll have everything documented from multiple angles. Plus, Glenn added, Agent Rodriguez will have a team standing by to respond immediately when we call in suspicious activity. Wesley looked between the two brothers. This is insane. What if something goes wrong? Glenn thought about the threat against his children, about the months of surveillance and psychological manipulation, about Roland Booth's systematic plan to destroy everything he'd built. Then Roland Booth will learn what happens when you threaten a combat engineer's family and give him time to prepare. The trap was set. In a few hours, they would learn whether Glenn's gamble would save his family or destroy everything he'd worked to protect. Chapter 6. The Perfect Trap. At 11 p.m., Agent Rodriguez arrived with a full forensics team to search Glenn's house. Glenn had made sure Melanie and the kids were staying at her sister's place, ostensibly for their safety during the investigation, but really to keep them away from what was about to unfold. I appreciate you calling this in, Mr. Coleman, Rodriguez said as his team began systematically checking the basement. Given everything that's happened with Booth, we need to take every precaution. Glenn nodded, playing his role perfectly. I just want to make sure he can't plant evidence and claim we were manufacturing something dangerous. Better to have it officially documented that our house is clean. The search took 2 hours and turned up exactly nothing, which was precisely what Glenn had expected. Rodriguez had his team photograph and document every room, creating an official federal record that Glenn Coleman's house contained no illegal materials as of 1 a.m. on Thursday morning. After the FBI team left, Glenn, Chad, and Wesley gathered in the surveillance command center Chad had set up in Glenn's office. Multiple screens showed feeds from around the neighborhood, the warehouse, and key locations throughout the city. Now we wait, Chad said, settling in with a cup of coffee. If Booth is planning to plant evidence, he'll do it in the next few hours while he thinks the heat has died down. What if he doesn't? Wesley asked. Then we go to phase 2, Glenn replied. But I'm betting he can't resist the opportunity. His whole plan depends on making us look guilty, and he just got confirmation that we're clean as of tonight. At 3:17 a.m., the motion sensors around Glenn's neighborhood triggered. Chad pulled up the camera feeds and swore softly. We've got movement. 2 vehicles approaching from different directions. Glenn watched as the vehicles stopped 3 blocks away from his house. 8 figures in dark clothing emerged, carrying equipment bags and what looked like portable manufacturing equipment. They're not just planting evidence, Glenn realized. They're going to manufacture it on-site to make it look fresher. Chad was already on his radio, coordinating with the backup surveillance positions he'd established earlier. I've got eyes on the primary target. Booth is with them, directing the operation. Glenn called Agent Rodriguez. Agent Rodriguez, I've got suspicious activity around my house. Multiple vehicles, people in dark clothing carrying equipment. I think Booth is making his move. We're en route. ETA 8 minutes. Do not engage, just observe and document. Glenn smiled grimly. Don't worry, I have no intention of engaging. I want them caught in the act with all the evidence on them. The surveillance feeds showed Booth's team moving through Glenn's neighborhood with practiced efficiency. They had clearly studied the area extensively. They knew exactly where the streetlights were, which houses had dogs, and the optimal approach routes. They're splitting up, Chad observed. Looks like simultaneous entry points, front and back of the house. Glenn watched as several team members began setting up what appeared to be a portable chemical lab in his backyard, while others prepared to enter the house itself. This is beautiful, Wesley said, somewhat awed by the complexity of what they were witnessing. They're not just framing you. They're creating a complete crime scene designed to support a domestic terrorism narrative. Which means when the FBI arrives, they're going to find Booth and his team in the middle of manufacturing evidence, Glenn replied. Red-handed, with all their equipment and plans. The surveillance footage would be damning, but Glenn wanted more than just a conviction. He wanted to understand the full scope of Booth's operation and make sure there were no other surprises waiting for his family. Chad, can you get audio from the backyard? Chad adjusted his equipment. Coming through now. Booth's voice came through clearly. The chemical residue needs to look like it's been here for weeks. Make sure the containers have partial fingerprints, but nothing too obvious. And remember, the detonation timer components go in the basement workshop area. Glenn felt his blood run cold. Detonation timer components? He's not just framing you for manufacturing chemical weapons, Chad said grimly. He's framing you for planning a bombing. Wesley pulled up news articles on his laptop. Glenn, there's a major political rally scheduled for this weekend at the convention center. 5,000 people expected, including the governor and 2 senators. Glenn understood immediately. He's going to make it look like we were planning to bomb the political rally, and he's going to discover the evidence just in time to stop the attack and look like a hero. Jesus, Chad muttered. This isn't just revenge anymore. He's trying to turn himself into some kind of folk hero who exposed a terrorist plot. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through Glenn's radio. We're in position. Count of suspects. Glenn checked the surveillance feeds. 8 total, including Booth. They're currently manufacturing evidence in my backyard and placing materials inside my house. Full documentation is being recorded. Understood. Moving in now. What happened next was chaos, but orchestrated chaos that Glenn had been planning for hours. FBI agents surrounded the house from all directions simultaneously, trapping Booth's team in the middle of their evidence-planting operation. The surveillance footage caught everything. Booth directing his team to place chemical residue in specific locations, the portable lab being used to manufacture fake explosive components, and most damaging of all, Booth himself explaining to his team exactly how the evidence should be arranged to support their narrative. This is for destroying my life, Booth snarled as Agent Rodriguez placed him in handcuffs. You ruined everything I built, and I was going to return the favor. Glenn emerged from his house as the arrests were being made, making sure the surveillance cameras caught his interaction with law enforcement. Agent Rodriguez, I can't thank you enough for taking this seriously. I was terrified that he might try to plant evidence. You did the right thing, Mr. Coleman. If you hadn't called us when you did, he might have successfully framed you for domestic terrorism. The beauty of Glenn's trap wasn't just that it caught Booth in the act. It was that it created an official federal record of Glenn's complete cooperation with law enforcement and his proactive efforts to prevent being framed. Every aspect of Booth's revenge plan was now documented as exactly what it was, an elaborate criminal conspiracy. Over the next few hours, as the FBI processed the crime scene and interrogated the suspects, the full scope of Booth's operation became clear. He had spent 6 months and nearly $500,000 creating an elaborate plan to destroy Glenn's family through a combination of slow poison, manufactured evidence, and staged terrorism charges. But like Walker before him, Booth had underestimated his target. He thought he was dealing with a lucky suburban engineer who had stumbled into one successful business victory. Instead, he'd gone to war with a combat veteran who had turned Booth's own elaborate plan into a perfect trap. Mr. Coleman, Agent Rodriguez said as the last of the suspects was loaded into FBI vehicles. "I have to ask, how did you know exactly when and how they would try to plant evidence?" Glenn looked at his house, where crime scene technicians were photographing all the fake evidence Booth's team had been caught placing. Roland Booth made the same mistake that criminals always make when they're dealing with engineers, Glenn replied. He assumed that because we think systematically, we can't think tactically. He planned his revenge like an engineering project, methodical, predictable, and vulnerable to someone who understood the system better than he did. Agent Rodriguez shook his head in admiration. "Well, thanks to your planning, we've got enough evidence to put Booth and his entire operation away for the next 20 years. And we've prevented what could have been a devastating attack on that political rally." Glenn nodded, but his mind was already moving ahead to the next challenge. Booth might be neutralized, but his arrest would likely trigger investigations into everyone he'd been working with, everyone who had funded his operation, and everyone who might have similar grievances against the Coleman family. The war might be won, but Glenn had learned enough about his enemies to know that the peace would require constant vigilance. Chapter 7: Unraveling the Network. The interrogation of Roland Booth and his associates revealed a conspiracy far more extensive than Glenn had imagined. What had started as one man's revenge plot had evolved into a network of criminals, ex-convicts, and corrupt professionals who had been systematically targeting families they blamed for their legal troubles. Agent Rodriguez called Glenn the next morning with disturbing news. "We've been going through Booth's financial records and communications," Rodriguez said. "He wasn't just targeting your family. We've identified at least 12 other families across 5 states who were being stalked, harassed, or worse by this network." Glenn felt a chill run through him. How many others used the plant method? 3. All successful professionals who had provided testimony that resulted in criminal convictions. 2 of the families are already showing symptoms of poisoning, and 1. Rodriguez paused. 1 family in Phoenix didn't make it. Glenn closed his eyes, thinking about another family somewhere who had received a beautiful exotic plant as a gift and had no reason to suspect it was anything other than what it appeared to be. What about the people funding this operation? That's where things get really interesting. Booth was essentially running a revenge-for-hire service, funded by wealthy clients who wanted to destroy people without getting their own hands dirty. Wesley, who had been listening to the call on speaker, looked up from his laptop. A revenge service? Like a business. Complete with client consultation, customized attack plans, and ongoing surveillance services. Booth had turned his personal vendetta into a profitable criminal enterprise. Glenn felt his tactical mind engage. "Agent Rodriguez, has Booth been talking?" "Not willingly, but his computer files are very comprehensive. He documented everything: client contracts, target profiles, operational timelines. The man was meticulous." "What about his clients? Are they still active threats?" "That's why I'm calling. We've identified 3 clients who specifically requested services targeting your family. Booth was just the contractor. They're the ones who paid for the extended surveillance and the plant operation." Glenn exchanged glances with Wesley. "Who are they?" "Arnold Short, former CFO of Hartwell Construction. Carrie Mendoza, who lost a medical malpractice lawsuit where you testified as an expert witness 2 years ago. And," Rodriguez paused, "Stephen McIntyre, current board member of Riverside Private Academy." Glenn felt the world tilt around him. "McIntyre is on the board of my kid's school. Not just on the board. He's the chairman of the security committee. He's had access to detailed information about your children's schedules, pickup procedures, and emergency contact for over a year." Wesley was already pulling up information on his laptop. "Glenn, McIntyre was one of the investors who lost money in the medical device company we exposed last year. The one that was selling faulty surgical implants." Glenn remembered the case. His firm had been hired to analyze the mechanical failures in a series of surgical implants that had caused dozens of patients to require additional surgeries. Their testimony had not only resulted in criminal charges, but had also triggered a cascade of civil lawsuits that had bankrupted several companies. "How much access has McIntyre had to information about our family?" Rodriguez's voice was grim. Complete access. School records, medical information for enrollment, emergency contact procedures, even architectural plans of the school buildings. If someone wanted to target your children specifically, McIntyre could have provided everything they needed. Glenn's protective instincts went into overdrive. Where is he now? We're tracking him down, but his house appears to be empty and his office says he hasn't been in for 3 days. Glenn was already moving toward his gun safe. Agent Rodriguez, I need protection details on my family immediately. If McIntyre has been planning something specific targeting the kids. Already arranged. But Glenn, there's something else. We found evidence that McIntyre has been in contact with other parents at Riverside Private Academy. Other families who've had business disputes or legal problems in the past. He's been recruiting. It looks like it. We think he was using his position on the school board to identify wealthy families with enemies, then connecting those families with booth services. Wesley looked up from his research. Glenn, this is massive. If McIntyre was essentially running a referral service for revenge operations, then there could be dozens of other families in danger right now. Glenn finished. Glenn's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your children look so peaceful when they sleep. Too bad you won't be around to protect them much longer. Agent Rodriguez heard Glenn's sharp intake of breath. What is it? Glenn read the message aloud. Rodriguez immediately got on his radio, coordinating with the protection details assigned to Glenn's family. All units, possible imminent threat to the Coleman family. Increase alert status immediately. But Glenn was already thinking beyond immediate protection. Agent Rodriguez, McIntyre has been planning this for over a year. He has detailed knowledge of our routines, our security measures, and our children's schedules. Traditional protection might not be enough. What are you suggesting? Glenn looked at Chad, who had been monitoring the conversation with the focused attention of a professional soldier. I'm suggesting that Stephen McIntyre is about to learn the same lesson that Roland Booth just learned. You don't threaten a combat engineer's family and expect to walk away. Chad was already checking his equipment. What's the plan? Glenn pulled up the architectural plans of Riverside Private Academy on his computer. McIntyre knows the school's security procedures because he helped design them. But he doesn't know that we know he's involved. You want to use the school as bait? I want to use ourselves as bait. McIntyre wants to hurt our children to get to us. Instead, we're going to make ourselves available and let him come after us directly. Wesley looked concerned. That's incredibly dangerous. Glenn nodded. It is, but it's also the only way to end this permanently. As long as McIntyre is out there with his network of clients and contacts, our family will never be safe. Agent Rodriguez came back on the line. We've got movement. McIntyre's car was spotted heading toward the school district. He's not alone. At least 3 other vehicles in convoy. Glenn felt that familiar combat calm descend over him. Agent Rodriguez, I need you to coordinate with Chad on positioning your tactical teams. We're going to end this tonight. Glenn, I can't authorize you to engage in active combat operations. You don't have to. Everything we're going to do will be in defense of our family and in full cooperation with federal law enforcement. But when this is over, Stephen McIntyre and his network are going to wish they'd chosen different targets. Chad was already suiting up in tactical gear. It's time to show these people what happens when you threaten the wrong family. Glenn looked at the surveillance feeds showing McIntyre's convoy approaching their neighborhood. After months of being hunted, it was time to become the hunter. The final battle for the Coleman family's safety was about to begin. Chapter 8, The Final Gambit. Glenn's plan was elegantly simple. Instead of hiding from McIntyre, he would make himself an irresistible target while leading the attack into a carefully prepared killing ground. But first, he needed to ensure his family's absolute safety. Chad, I need you to get Melanie and the kids to your ranch in Wyoming. Tonight. What about you? I'm staying here to finish this. McIntyre won't stop until he gets personal revenge against me specifically. If I'm not here, he might go after the kids wherever they are. Wesley looked up from the tactical communications setup he'd been monitoring. The FBI intercepts are showing increased chatter between McIntyre and at least 6 other individuals. Glenn, this isn't just one man with a grudge anymore. This is a coordinated assault. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. Glenn, we've confirmed that McIntyre has been in contact with several former military contractors, the kind of people who know how to conduct urban warfare operations. Glenn nodded grimly. Then we make sure this urban warfare happens exactly where and when we want it to. Chad finished loading his vehicle with Melanie and the kids' belongings. I can have them in Wyoming in 12 hours. But Glenn, I don't like leaving you here alone. I won't be alone. Wesley's staying, and Agent Rodriguez has a full tactical team in position. Glenn knelt down to hug Emma and Ethan goodbye, trying to project calm confidence while his heart was breaking at the thought of the danger they'd been in. Daddy, why do we have to go to Uncle Chad's ranch? Emma asked. Because there are some bad people who want to hurt our family, and Uncle Chad's ranch is the safest place for you and Mom to be while I take care of the problem. Ethan, who had always been the more perceptive of the twins, looked at his father with 8-year-old seriousness. Are you going to stop the bad people, Dad? Yes, son, I am. And when I do, they'll never be able to hurt any family ever again. After Chad left with Glenn's family, the house felt strangely empty. But it also felt like what it was about to become, a fortress designed to protect what Glenn valued most. Wesley had been monitoring electronic communications all day. Glenn, McIntyre's people are conducting surveillance on the house right now. They know Melanie and the kids left with Chad. Good. That means they'll assume I'm alone and vulnerable. Agent Rodriguez arrived at 10 p.m. with a tactical briefing. We've identified 7 individuals working with McIntyre, including 2 former special operations soldiers and a demolitions expert. They're not just planning to hurt you, Glenn. They're planning to make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. What's their timeline? Based on our intercepts, they're moving tonight, probably between 2 and 4 a.m. when they think you'll be asleep. Glenn looked at the defensive preparations he and Chad had made earlier. Perfect. That gives us time to make sure everything is ready. The house had been transformed into a tactical nightmare for anyone attempting to breach it. Every entry point had been rigged with motion sensors, cameras, and defensive measures that would channel attackers into predetermined kill zones. More importantly, every aspect of the defense had been designed to be legally justifiable as protection of Glenn's home and family. The beauty of this setup, Glenn explained to Agent Rodriguez, is that we're not ambushing them. They're breaking into my house with intent to commit murder. Everything we do after that is legal self-defense. At 1:47 a.m., the perimeter sensors triggered. 7 figures in tactical gear were approaching the house from multiple directions, using military-style coordination and communication. Glenn watched from his reinforced command center as McIntyre's team moved into position. They were good, professional, disciplined, and well-equipped. Under normal circumstances, they probably would have succeeded in their mission. But these weren't normal circumstances. They were attacking the home of a combat engineer who had had weeks to prepare and had unlimited federal law enforcement backup. Agent Rodriguez, they're moving into position. Are your teams ready? Standing by. Glenn, once this starts, you follow our lead. These people are professional killers. Glenn checked his weapon and body armor one final time. Agent Rodriguez, these people made one critical mistake. What's that? They assumed I was a victim. They're about to learn I'm not. The attack began at 2:23 a.m. with a coordinated breach of 3 entry points simultaneously. McIntyre's team moved through the house with professional efficiency, using suppressed weapons and military tactics. What they found was exactly what Glenn had wanted them to find: a house that appeared to be defended by one man with limited tactical experience. Glenn led them through the house room by room, appearing to retreat in panic while actually drawing them deeper into the trap he'd prepared. Every movement had been choreographed to make McIntyre's team think they were winning while actually positioning them exactly where the FBI's tactical units could engage them most effectively. The final confrontation took place in Glenn's living room, where McIntyre himself cornered what he thought was a terrified suburban engineer. "You destroyed my life," McIntyre snarled, aiming his weapon at Glenn's chest. "You cost me everything I built, everything I worked for. Now I'm going to return the favor." Glenn looked at McIntyre with cold satisfaction. "Stephen, you made the same mistake everyone else has made." "What mistake?" "You assumed I was a victim instead of a predator." The FBI tactical team breached the room from 3 directions simultaneously, ending the threat in less than 10 seconds. McIntyre and his remaining team members were taken alive, but barely. When the smoke cleared, Agent Rodriguez found Glenn calmly documenting the scene with his phone, making sure every aspect of the defensive action was properly recorded. "It's over?" Rodriguez asked. Glenn looked at the captured attackers, then at the evidence that would ensure they spent the rest of their lives in federal prison. "The shooting's over. But McIntyre's client network is still out there, and they're going to be very unhappy when they learn their revenge service has been shut down." Wesley emerged from the command center where he'd been coordinating communications. "Actually, Glenn, I don't think that's going to be a problem." "Why not?" Wesley showed him a laptop displaying financial records. "While you were dealing with the attack, I've been tracing the money trail from all of Booth's clients. The FBI raids tonight didn't just capture McIntyre's team. They captured records that implicate over 40 people in 12 states who were paying for revenge services." Agent Rodriguez looked at the scope of the evidence. "This is going to be the largest organized crime takedown in federal history." Glenn felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal victory. How many families were they targeting? At least 100, maybe more. "Glenn, your decision to fight instead of hide just saved the lives of people you'll never meet." Glenn thought about the family in Phoenix who hadn't been as lucky as his own, about the dozens of families who were going to sleep safely tonight because they would never know how close they'd come to being victims of this network. "Agent Rodriguez, I want to make sure every family that was being targeted gets notified and protected until all these arrests are completed." "Already in progress." The FBI is coordinating with local law enforcement across 12 states. Glenn's phone buzzed with a message from Chad. "All secure in Wyoming. Kids asking when Dad's coming to visit the ranch." Glenn smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that had been there for weeks. "Tell them Dad will be there soon. The bad people have been stopped." As the FBI crime scene teams processed the evidence and the last of the attackers were loaded into federal transport vehicles, Glenn stood in his living room surveying the damage. His house looked like a war zone, but his family was safe, and a network of killers had been dismantled. Wesley joined him, carrying a bottle of whiskey that had somehow survived the evening's chaos. "So," Wesley said, pouring 2 glasses, "when you said you were going to show them what a real engineer could do, I don't think they expected anything quite this comprehensive." Glenn accepted the whiskey and raised his glass. "To the families we'll never meet who get to wake up safe tomorrow." They drank in silence, 2 engineers who had used their skills to protect what mattered most. The war for Glenn Coleman's family was finally over. Chapter 9. Justice and New Beginnings. 3 months later, Glenn stood in a federal courthouse in Denver watching as Stephen McIntyre received a life sentence without possibility of parole. The courtroom was packed with family members of other victims, people who had been targeted by the Revenge Network but had lived to see justice served. Agent Rodriguez sat in the gallery behind Glenn, having become something of a friend during the extensive investigation and trial preparation. The scope of the conspiracy they'd uncovered had made national news and led to congressional hearings about domestic terrorism networks. The defendant, Judge Patricia Morrison, said, orchestrated a criminal enterprise that resulted in multiple murders, attempted murders, and the systematic terrorization of over 100 American families. The court finds that the defendant poses a continuing danger to society and that no sentence short of life imprisonment would be adequate to protect the public. Glenn felt a deep satisfaction as McIntyre was led away in shackles. But the real victory wasn't the punishment of his enemies. It was the knowledge that Emma and Ethan would grow up in a world where this particular network of killers could never threaten anyone again. After the sentencing, Glenn met with some of the other families who had been targeted. The Hendersons from Phoenix, whose teenage daughter had nearly died from a poison plant. The Williams family from Texas, who had been stalked for months by hired investigators. The Johnsons from Florida, whose business had been sabotaged by arsonists working for the network. Mr. Coleman, Mrs. Henderson said. "I want to thank you for what you did. If you hadn't fought back when you did, my daughter would be dead." Glenn shook her hand, seeing his own protective fury reflected in her eyes. "Mrs. Henderson, the only reason any of us survive this is because we refuse to be victims. Your family's courage in testifying helped put these people away for life." Dr. Williams, a pediatric surgeon who had been targeted after testifying about faulty medical devices, joined the conversation. "What are you going to do now? I imagine it's hard to go back to normal life after something like this." Glenn had been thinking about that question for weeks. "Actually, Wesley and I have decided to make some changes to our engineering firm." "What kind of changes?" "We're starting a new division, security consulting for families who are being threatened or stalked. Too many people don't know how to protect themselves when they become targets, and law enforcement can't always provide adequate protection." Agent Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation, nodded approvingly. "There's definitely a need for that kind of service. Most people don't have your background or resources." Glenn thought about the months of fear his family had endured, about the sophisticated planning it had taken to turn the tables on their attackers. "We're calling it Coleman Burton Personal Security. The idea is to help families identify threats early, implement effective countermeasures, and work with law enforcement to resolve dangerous situations." Wesley, who had been talking with the FBI's cybercrime specialists, joined the group. "We're also working with federal agencies to develop better systems for detecting organized stalking and revenge networks before they can hurt anyone." Dr. Williams looked intrigued. "That sounds like exactly what a lot of families need. Are you taking clients?" Glenn smiled. "We officially launch next month. Our first case is already interesting. A judge in California who's been receiving death threats from a network of defendants she's sentenced over the years." The conversation was interrupted by Glenn's phone buzzing with a call from Chad in Wyoming. "Glenn, you need to get out of here. Emma just caught a fish bigger than she is, and Ethan has decided he wants to be a cowboy when he grows up. Melanie says she's never moving back to the city." Glenn laughed, the sound carrying none of the tension that had characterized his voice for months. "Tell them I'll be there tomorrow. The trial's over, and the business can wait a few more days." How did it end? Life without parole from McIntyre. Life sentences for 3 of his associates. The others got between 20 and 30 years. Nobody from this network will ever threaten a family again. Good. Emma and Ethan have been asking when they can go home. Glenn looked around the courthouse at the families who were finally able to move on with their lives, at the law enforcement officers who had worked tirelessly to bring justice. Tell them they can come home anytime they want. The bad people are gone, and they're never coming back. That evening, Glenn and Wesley sat in a Denver bar popular with law enforcement, sharing drinks with Agent Rodriguez and several other FBI agents who had worked on the case. "You know," Rodriguez said, "in 15 years with the Bureau, I've never seen a civilian operation as effective as what you pulled off. You took down a network that we didn't even know existed." Glenn raised his beer. "We got lucky. If Melanie hadn't bought that plant, if Wesley hadn't recognized what it was, if you hadn't taken the threat seriously—" "That wasn't luck," Rodriguez interrupted. "That was intelligence, preparation, and the kind of determination that most people don't have when their families are threatened. You turned a systematic attempt to destroy your family into the downfall of everyone who tried to hurt you." Wesley nodded. Plus, Glenn never forgot that this wasn't just about us. Every move he made was designed to protect other families, too. Glenn thought about the families in Phoenix, Texas, and Florida who would sleep safely that night because a network of killers was behind bars. He thought about Emma and Ethan growing up without the shadow of threat hanging over their lives. "Agent Rodriguez, I want to ask you something. In your professional opinion, do you think we've seen the end of organized revenge networks like this one?" Rodriguez considered the question seriously. "Unfortunately, no. There will always be people who want to hurt others and people willing to help them do it for money. But what you've done, exposing how these networks operate and showing that they can be defeated, that's going to make it a lot harder for them to succeed." Glenn nodded. "Then Coleman Burton Personal Security has a lot of work to do." 2 days later, Glenn stood on the porch of Chad's ranch in Wyoming, watching Emma and Ethan ride horses in the corral while Melanie helped Chad's wife prepare dinner. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully peaceful, that it was hard to believe they'd been living in mortal danger just a few months earlier. "Dad," Emma called from her horse, "Uncle Chad says we can come visit the ranch anytime we want." "That's right, sweetheart. And you can visit anytime you want." Ethan rode over to the fence where Glenn was standing. "Dad, are the bad people really gone forever?" Glenn looked at his son, 8 years old, and already showing the kind of thoughtful seriousness that would serve him well in life. "Yes, son. The specific bad people who wanted to hurt our family are gone forever. They're in prison and they're never getting out. But there might be other bad people someday." Glenn considered how to answer that honestly without frightening his child. "There might be, Ethan, but now we know how to protect ourselves, and we have friends who will help us if we ever need it." Ethan nodded solemnly, then brightened. "And you know how to catch the bad people in traps." Glenn laughed. "That's right. I know how to catch bad people in traps." That evening, after the kids were asleep, Glenn and Melanie walked through the ranch's pastures under a sky full of stars that were invisible from their Denver neighborhood. "Glenn," Melanie said quietly, "I've been thinking about what we've been through, and I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm proud of you. Not just for protecting us, but for how you protected us. You could have just run, or hidden, or let the FBI handle everything. Instead, you turned the whole thing around and saved 100 other families in the process." Glenn stopped walking and pulled his wife close. "Melanie, I want you to know something. From the moment I realized our family was in danger, I never doubted that we would survive this. Not because I'm particularly brave or smart, but because I wasn't willing to accept any other outcome." "What do you mean?" "I mean that some things in life are non-negotiable. The safety of my family is one of those things. And anyone who threatens what I'm not willing to lose is going to discover just how dangerous that makes me." Melanie kissed him, and for the first time in months, Glenn felt complete peace. The Coleman family had not just survived their ordeal. They had emerged stronger, closer, and surrounded by new friends who understood the value of protecting what matters most. As they walked back toward the ranch house, Glenn's phone buzzed with a message from their first client in California. "Mr. Coleman, the threats have stopped completely since your team began the investigation. I can't thank you enough for giving me my life back." Glenn smiled and put his phone away without responding. Tomorrow, he would get back to work protecting other families. Tonight, he was going to enjoy the perfect safety and peace his own family had earned through their courage and determination. The war was over. The victory was complete. And the Coleman family's new chapter was just beginning. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.